Having stripped out the interior in the last video, I shifted my attentions to the front end of the car. I'm going to remove the engine, primarily for access to the inner wings and bulkhead so that I can treat these for paint. But also, I will be refitting a different engine that's been reworked by Cork Engine Centre. At this point it looks like I will be taking a slightly different direction with the project to what I had thought of when I was recording the introduction. It looks like I'm going to build to Group 2 specification rather than Group 1, but still retain a 1300cc engine, which otherwise would have made it eligible for Group 1. But there were parts that were in the donor engine that was originally rallied back in period that had performance parts higher than the spec for Group 1, but would be eligible within Group 2. This doesn't change the class that I would actually be rallying the car in, and also allows me some more freedoms with the interior and removal of sound deadening material from the floor, as well as carpets and the rear seats. I'm doing a lot of studying in the background, but I'll give you a summary of the decisions made in relation to these at the end when I've finally got my head around this. I'm having to do this quickly as the project is moving along. With the car jacked up, I'm draining the fluids. I've already emptied the sump, and I'm now just about to release the coolant from the radiator. This is also a good opportunity to disconnect the front of the exhaust system from the rear. I should be able to complete the rest of the tasks from above, so I've dropped the car back down. It'll be nice to reroute those brake pipes through the interior of the car and not have them out there where they're in danger of being caught by the jack. I always think of the battery when I start doing work in the engine bay. Now I already had it disconnected right since the beginning, but I'll remove it now altogether, and that'll give me more space when it comes to removing the distributor. It's good to have all sources of ignition removed when you might be releasing some fuel vapors, as I'm now disconnecting the inlet pipe to the fuel pump. I'll put a bung in that as soon as I've pulled it back through this bracket. Okay, the air filter housing can be removed, and that'll let me get at the throttle cable and the clutch cable. I'll take off the plug leads from the front, and to give you another bit of space for the spanner on the distributor, I'll actually take off the fan. Everything's coming out eventually. I'm just doing the things that make it easy to remove the engine at the moment. That's the vacuum pipe from the servo. And now a spanner for the distributor. In the end it worked out easier to release it from behind, but sometimes the spanner fits on the front, and that's where it's useful to have the fan removed. So pull that out of the way. Works directly off the cam. Around the back of the engine, I'm disconnecting the wiring to the alternator. There really is less than a dozen wires to this engine, which makes it very simple to work with, and also very reliable, as there's very little to go wrong. The blue one on top was the temperature sensor, and I also disconnected the oil light from below. I'm disconnecting the two wires to the starter motor now. The heavy one is connected by a nut, and the smaller one just by a spade connector, similar to the alternator. With those disconnected, I could pull them back through and out of harm's way. That's the fuel stop solenoid on the carburetor I'm removing now. I disconnected the green vacuum pipe from the distributor when I removed that earlier. At the back of the carburetor, I disconnected the throttle cable and the choke cable. That's the big coolant hose from the radiator, and also the one down from the expansion tank. At the back, I need to release the return from the interior radiator. The little screwdriver with a socket attachment on the end is quite handy here. I was moving a bucket around underneath the car to catch all this coolant as I opened each set of hoses. This is the hose that takes the hot water from the engine and into the top of the radiator for cooling. This is the outlet from the thermostat, which controls when the water goes to the radiator. That's where coolant comes out of this heated inlet manifold, which prevents the fuel air mixture getting too cold. I'll put some Q10 penetrating oil on the exhaust manifold studs. I'll also put a little squirt on the two bolts holding that heat ducting. They've been off before, so they're not likely to be as seized as they can be. The little ratchet will shift them with a little bit of elbow grease. It's pretty important with the plug leads going right over these to keep that in place. So I'll remove the manifold studs. Short extension makes that very easy, and the last one coming out there by hand. There's enough space then with the fan removed to drop that onto the ground, and it can be twisted out without jacking the car up. I'm loosening one of the gearbox bolts now all the way because it holds that coolant pipe that goes around the back of the engine, and I want to remove that before I go down to the starter motor. So I'm just wiggling it off. There's another section of rubber pipe that goes onto the back of the water pump. So I've now got all of that out of the way. I loosened off the lower bolt on the starter motor with several extensions. The top bolt is accessible with a short socket on this side of the manifold, supporting the weight of the starter motor by basically hugging the inlet manifold. Got my left arm around under it. It was easy then to remove the bolt. It was just finger tight, and there's actually enough space to get the starter out the top here. With all the ancillaries removed, I could pull the car up into position below my electric hoist and drop the hook down to a strap I had slung around the bottom of the engine around the sump. Guided up between two ports on the inlet manifold at the back and between two studs from the exhaust manifold on the front. I could now take out my big ratchet and tackle the gearbox bolts. I'd loosen them all off first. You can see why I'm not using the little socket on these. There's 4 going this way, 1 removed already, and 1 at each side going in the opposite direction. That's the front one of those. Them loosened, then I could just remove them. And then change socket and go to the main engine mounting and loosen that off. The weight of the engine is supported by the hoist now. I noticed it's moving a little bit, so I took up a little bit of the slack there. And then they came out nice and easy. I removed the whole bracket to give me wriggle room with the engine, and now I'll support the gearbox again so I can break the engine free from that. So give it a bit of a pull. It's kind of swinging on the straps. I decided to give myself enough clearance. I'd take off the gearbox mounting as well, just so that there was enough room for the input shaft. So it came off then. And I was able to lift it clear. I wish the speed on that hoist was a little bit more progressive, but it certainly beats removing the engine with just the jack.
I'm very excited about what might be going in here the next time, and it's great to be getting everything out of the way so that I can prepare this engine bay for what's coming next.